This is about weird encounters that I've had with a music teacher when I was a kid. I, 20 female, took orchestra class when I was in middle school. Now it's important to mention that I was an incredibly quiet and shy kid back then, and I had trouble with confrontation. When I was in 6th grade, our orchestra teacher, Miss K, left a position, and they hired our new teacher. I'll call him Mr. S. He was generally disliked by everyone. He was in his 50s to early 60s, and to an 11-year-old, very tall. He was already imposing because of this, but what made it worse was how he treated his female students. One day in class, we were all struggling to play a song correctly. Mr. S became frustrated and didn't think any of us understood the beat of the song. He looked around the class, saying he needed a volunteer. Everyone became silent, including me, but I had the misfortune of locking eyes with him. He then called my name and waved me up to the front of the room. What happened next was not something that anyone was expecting. I picked up my instrument, which was a cello at the time, to take up front with me, and he said, "No, leave your instrument. Just you." I was very confused, but I did as he said. I walked up to his side and he instructed me to stand in front of him. At this point, the class was beginning to snicker and I was just very uncomfortable. "Move closer." I took a small step towards him, and at this point I was too scared to look at his face. All I could see his buttoned shirt in front of me. He made me walk closer until I was inches from him. Then he moved my arm up and grabbed my hand and proceeded to make me slow dance with him for what felt like forever as he counted the beat. I let go of his hand at one point and I tried walking back to my seat, but he grabbed my arm and pulled me back, saying, "Not yet." After this was over and I went on to my other classes, I learned that in each period of the day, he had chosen a female student to dance with him, regardless if the class was struggling to understand the beat or not. Unfortunately, this was not the end to what felt like unwanted attention from him. He would somehow find me in the hallways often and would try to have talks with me about anything, even though I mostly kept to myself and I didn't cause trouble in class. It got to a point that my friends understood how I felt and knew to say something to me when they saw him. And every time, without fail, he always managed to put his hands on my shoulders when he talked to me, even if I was already backed against the wall. He wouldn't let me leave and I was too scared to say anything. He would find me in a crowd easily. I'm not sure if he did anything to my knowledge that was punishable, but to me, something always felt off about him. So when I was in my first year in high school, I had a teacher whose name was Dr. Johansson. He used to teach my civics class. He was a special fella, not like the other teachers. In the school I attended, teachers were often not close to students in a social way. They were simply there to teach and that only. Dr. Johansson liked to keep contact with students, and so he decided it would be a lot easier to do so if he had a Facebook account. He started adding people on Facebook from our school and eventually started talking to them. He often posted weird stuff on his wall and commented weird things. For example, one time he posted the song Straight Outta Compton and wrote, "All they say is the N-word. I don't get it." Of course, some students commented and asked why he had used the N-word so freely. He removed the post and apologized, blamed it on being drunk, and that was it. Totally uncalled for. He started talking to students though, mostly boys, and he managed to find some students' numbers and even started sending them texts randomly. He would send stuff like, "Do you need help with the homework? You can come over to my place and I could help you out over a glass of wine." And he would say these things to teens that were younger than 18. So according to the law, they are not allowed to drink. And he pretty much offered alcohol to minors. Remember, he's a civics teacher. He should know this stuff by heart. It's all morals, for God's sake. Anyway, he never sent me a text, but he sent some weird texts to my friends. Later on, he decided to talk to me. This was a couple of weeks after he started contacting students like this. He would speak to me on Facebook chat and would ask me things like, "How do you get girls? Do you have a big dick? Do you often get to sleep with girls after your shows?" Because I'm an artist, I found these messages highly disturbing. But they became worse. "You must be such a stallion in bed. You're probably really good. And enter the rabbit hole with me. Come on, I'll take care of you." I literally had no clue what that last part meant. But this was not everything. After a while, things started to get really out of control. He started asking me to go to the club with him, and I was not of age at this time. He even said he could get me into the clubs with no ID, and that all would be well. But of course, I said no. He then apparently got pissed at me and decided not to speak to me much after that. I had turned him down a few times. He started talking to one of my near friends instead. It ended with Dr. Johansson sending my friend a picture of his ass with the caption, "Please take me from behind and take me hard." Mind you, my friend was 17 at the time, while Dr. Johansson was around his mid-30s. He was taken to court and he got his little sentence. He was to do community service for a while, then he was to pay my friend some fine, but that was it. He even still works at a school today and is totally accepted, and I find that very wrong. A man like that should not be able to get into that line of work again. Things could have gotten much worse than this. By the way, I live in Sweden, so the age of going to the club is 18, while the age of buying alcohol from a liquor store is 21. I know, weird laws, but that was my story. I try to keep it as brief as I possibly could. I am a now 21-year-old female living in the UK, but I won't tell you where specifically. This story takes place during my third year of high school when I was only 14. Please note at that stage of my life, I was a quiet and reserved individual, not one to make a scene. I am drastically different now as a result of the many events that occurred in my life, with this story being one of them. Anyway, at the end of the summer of that year, I had lost my uncle to the cancer that he had suffered with for 2 years. It wasn't the happiest times for me, as you can imagine. The funeral took place the day I was due to start school again, but I was encouraged to go in the next day regardless. My first class of the year is where I met him for the first time. For the sake of this story, I'm going to refer to him as Mr. Stone. Now, Mr. Stone was quite a young teacher. I'd probably say his early to mid-20s, and at a glance, he didn't look like your stereotypical creep. He was about average height, dark hair and eyes, and had a wispy thin goatee on his chin. I initially thought that he looked like a wizard or something funny like that. Now, I'd love to say that the moment I first met him he gave me a bad vibe or whatever, but I'd be lying if I did. I thought he was funny. A little strange, yeah, but not at all intimidating. I don't remember much of the few lessons in class, as I more or less just minded my own business. It started off with little things, such as prolonged glances over at me, lingering around the area that I was doing my work in, only holding me back after class to mark whatever I was doing that day, and complimenting me in front of my peers. By this time, most people would assume he favored me or something, which is an understatement in my opinion. I was already feeling a little uncomfortable in class around him, but it wasn't anything I couldn't handle. At least I thought. I just wanted to get on with things and pass this year, to be completely honest. At one point, he even told me that I reminded him of his girlfriend, which was beyond weird in my opinion, as I was a baby-faced 14-year-old, not a woman close to his own age. Despite the fact that many people saw him make this comment, no one took notice or even validated how weird this actually was. As the months crept by, I'd catch him staring at me from across the room several times, even winking suggestively at me when no one was looking over at him, trying to keep me back after class every other day, and giving me pet names such as his angel or his little star, trying to get me to stand closer to him when I was already close enough for him to touch. I understand that this on its own doesn't sound like anything that should warrant any cause of concern. Maybe he was just being overly friendly or disliked me more than my peers, as everybody kept on telling me. Yet why couldn't I shake this feeling that there was malicious intent behind every wink and every word aimed in my direction? Why did I feel sick to my stomach when I entered his room and see his face light up whenever he saw me walk in? Why did I feel scared whenever he intensely watched me do my classwork from the seat across from mine? I don't care what people have to say about my experience. There was something going on with him, and I was clearly his favorite little doll to play with. Finally, the end of the school year rolled around, and our school did a change of timetable a few weeks before summer. This meant that we'd get settled into our new classes, so after summer we would know where to go and what to do when we got there. My last lesson with Mr. Stone was an interesting one, to say the least. To cut a long story short, he told me that he wanted me in his class for the following year. I later found out that he even requested that I be put there, although I'm not entirely sure if that was true. My peers got him to admit that I was his favorite, and he more or less made me uncomfortable as usual. Thankfully, I wasn't in Mr. Stone's lessons the following year, as I would have been the only female if I was. However, his behavior never stopped there. Whenever he'd see me in the halls, he'd always make a point to try to get my attention by either waving or staring at me from wherever he was. One event in particular gave my own mother a chance to experience how creepy he was. I was honored that year for my hard work in my National 5 Art and Design class, and the school that I attended did this award ceremony to celebrate everyone's success. Kinda cheesy, I know. But this was an evening event, so friends and family were all invited to come along to watch us obtain our certificates. The hall was already full, and the air buzzed with the sound of excited Karens getting to see their precious child on stage, and the prospect of getting to brag about it later on. Us students were the last to enter the hall, so we filed in to take our seats at the front row. Take a guess who was sitting literally 3 seats away from my family. 10 points for those who guessed Mr. Stone. I began to panic profusely as the ceremony commenced. Why the hell was he here, and why was he sitting in the same row as my family? He wasn't obligated to be here, so why? I knew he knew that they were my family, as he also briefly taught my sister earlier that year, so process elimination, I guess. After the whole shit show, my high school pulled my family, and I soon began to exit the very crowded hall. My mother and I got separated from the rest of our group by another and the creep himself. He somehow managed to wedge himself into the crowd so that he could get behind my mother and I, staring at me and smiling with that creepy grin. My mother was having none of that predatory behavior towards me, and more or less shoved her way through the crowd to gain some distance between us and him. However, when I looked back, he was still grinning at me like a Cheshire cat, but was now frantically waving his arms about to try and catch my attention. Despite seeing this, my mother insisted that I was creepy, but I should just ignore him moving forward. He left the school I attended in November 2024, and I have neither heard of him or seen him since. Now I bet you're all wondering why I didn't report him to anyone at the time. To put it simply, I wasn't entirely sure if I could. The people who did see some of these events moved on after he left. No authority figure ever caught him doing anything I have listed. He was well liked among the students at my high school, and as many other people have pointed out when I tell him my story, he never actually technically did anything wrong to me. If I could go back in time, I would have reported these events, as I have came to learn that it doesn't matter if someone did something to you or not. If someone was persistently giving you unwanted attention, then you are within your rights to report it. It doesn't matter if the person harassing you is your friend, coworker, classmate, lecturer, coach, or teacher. You shouldn't have to stay silent. I wish someone could have told me that when I was 14, and maybe I would have spoke up against him, but I was too scared. So when I was 7 years old, I was in kindergarten. My birthday is late in the year, so I couldn't apply when I was 6 like most kids, since it was through the school year. We had a teacher named Mr. H, but this isn't all about him. It's about a substitute I had one day. I admittedly don't actually remember his name, as he was only there for like one day. Mr. H, however, was amazing and very caring and very good with the kids. But this substitute was not. He was generally weird and quiet, and didn't talk to us much besides what was absolutely required, like the daily story time, etc. But issues arrived at story time. I was wearing a skirt with leggings under it. It was never feminine. Turns out that I'm trans, so it makes a lot of sense. So I didn't cross my legs like a lady, so to speak, like my parents taught me, but hey, I was 7. So after story time, we had time that was like a free period. Some kids painted, some just walked, some napped or ate snacks. I was an avid reader, so I was reading like usual, sitting in the reading corner. The substitute was sitting there too. Nobody else was in the corner. The substitute turns to me and says very bluntly, "Are you wearing underwear? Because it doesn't look like you are." Keep in mind, I don't have my legs widespread, just not crossed. And I had leggings under my skirt. Also, for the record, I was wearing underwear. At the time, I was being abused sexually at home, so I honestly didn't think much of it. That sort of stuff was normal to me at the time, but I was still a little put off. I decided to read somewhere else, and I got up to move to the other side of the classroom. The substitute followed me. Throughout the entire block, the substitute followed me around the classroom, keeping his eyes on me as I did my various kid stuff, like playing with the sand table and painted and read. Every time we were doing anything complicated, like basic addition or spelling, he'd be hovering over me even though I didn't need help. He was also very touchy and was constantly touching my shoulder, running his fingers through my hair among other things. He never directly touched me inappropriately, but I was always uncomfortable with being touched at all due to the abuse at home. I ended up going home unscathed, and honestly, I didn't even tell my parents. I didn't even realize it was that weird until years later, when I was about 11 and coping with the rest of my trauma, that I realized That was really, really wrong. So creepy kindergarten substitute teacher, I hope somebody braver than I caught you and you got what you deserve. First off, I'll start by saying I'm a guy, and part of this happened secondhand via a female student that I knew well. When I was in grade 6, we had a split grade 6 and 7 class at my middle school. One of the grade 7 students, a tall red-haired girl, was quite physically mature for her age. She was constantly harassed by the other guys in the class, to the point of having her handbag stolen in the schoolyard so people could see her running in a short pink skirt. But we were all the same age at least. On the other hand, early on in the school year, our big hulking gym teacher, probably of Greek or Balkan origins, started acting funny around the redhead. He would always conveniently call on her for demonstrations and physically help her with the technique. This happened with no other students. Nothing untoward at all, and it happened in front of the whole class, but it was odd. If he needed a guy, unfortunately it was me and the other guy, but thankfully he wouldn't move our arms or legs to show us the proper push-up position, or anything like that. This went on all year until around March when he burst in on us boys in the change room. We all looked pissed off, but there was nothing we can do. He has some BS pretext and says that somebody took something and that he'd find the thief if I recall correctly. After he leaves, we all start singing, Mr. Forgot how many letters is a perv. Mr. Blank is a perv. Students could probably hear it all the way through the cafeteria, which was right behind. The gym teacher, who could certainly hear from his office, storms back in and says, "Stop that right now or I'm getting the principal." We actually stop more or less, except a few mutters, but a few minutes later, he stares at each and every one of us and starts shouting us down. "Which one of you is the thief? I'll have you expelled. And you're all protecting him and you're spreading rumors about me. Any more of this and you're all coming to the principal's office. I mean it." Yeah, maybe it was okay for Mr. Blank to enter the male change room, but we all thought he was creepy. Especially those of us who had the hots for the redhead. Maybe we're just being paranoid. 2 days later, I get pulled aside, literally. I think from indoor soccer and told to find the redhead, not her real name obviously, and tell her to come to his office. That's odd, I think to myself. She's like 50 feet away, playing on the girl's side of the gym. Go find her yourself. Like I said, this guy is creepy as hell. Nevertheless, I can't do anything though, so I go to tell her that he wants to see her in his office. She looks as scared as I am, and I go back to playing soccer, not forgetting the incident. Apparently, he had asked her if she wanted anything from the teacher's lounge, and she said no. He leaves, saying that he's just getting coffee for himself and a couple of donuts, just in case she changes her mind. When he comes back, he tells her that he's been noticing her squats report and asks her to practice right there with him. Their conversation goes something like this. My team needs me, they're down a person. Forget about them, we're talking about you. Here, try it. Let me show you. But I... Do it. The creepy gym teacher then proceeds to walk behind her and grab her waist, looking down her blouse from behind her. Am I making you uncomfortable? She bolts out and leaves the office in a rush, with tears streaming down her eyes, and she goes to the change room early that day. And since PE is the last course in the day, I don't see her until the following morning. The next day, while the gym teacher's in his office, he was usually in his office, doing nothing and not supervising. And while we're supposed to be doing a few laps around the gym, she jogs up to me and a few other male students, and she tells us everything. That afternoon after class, the boys' change room, most of us had the hots for her, started screaming at the top of our lungs. Who's a effing perv? Mr. Blank is. Somehow the administrators didn't hear us, and the next 2 years I was there, as far as I know, nobody ever reported this guy. It must have shocked him to hear kids this young cursing, let alone cursing that loud. At any rate, he wasn't fired during my tenure there. What happened to the girl? Well, thankfully he no longer called on her to demonstrate techniques for the rest of the year. He probably got the message through the walls of the boys' change room. Her final year there, she had a different PE teacher. I sadly lost contact with her after middle school, but thankfully she did the smart thing and got out of that man's office before things really got out of hand. I'm worried that something worse would have happened. I moved to Loveland, Colorado with my family when I was about 9 years old. Loveland is not a big city, but it's not a small town either. We lived in a nice house just on the outskirts of town, so my little sister and I attended Big Thompson Elementary School since it was nearby. It'd be fair to say that all the students at Big T lived out in the boonies and were what you might consider to be more the country type of kids. When I was in 5th grade, my class couldn't have been more than 35 kids in it, and we were split into 2 classes, so our teachers' jobs were more manageable. To add some more information, it was probably 2002 or 2003 when I was in 5th grade, and I'm a girl, which will be relevant later. Big T had 2 playgrounds, upper and lower. The lower or main playground is visible from Country Road 27 and has your standard jungle gym equipment, most of which is pretty old. The upper playground is mostly dirt and pea gravel. When it was nice outside, which it usually is in northern Colorado, we'd oftentimes have our gym classes there, so we had lots of room to run, play kickball, or to trip and fall and get sand and small rocks embedded into our skin. I still have scars on my knees. Now that you know Big T, here's my story. I believe my peers and I had finished up with our music class and were headed up to gym class. It was nice outside and we were instructed to go to the upper playground. As kids do, we were all laughing and talking to our best friends. We started walking up the stairs, and at the top waiting for us was a man who introduced himself as our substitute gym teacher for the day, since the regular teacher was away. Do you guys ever get feelings about people, like good or bad? These are not necessarily related to anything the person does or says, it's just something about them that you can't really explain. You feel like you know them on some deeper level for some reason. My mom is usually really spot on with her feelings, especially the negative ones. She's always warned me about someone I shouldn't hang out with because of a bad feeling. And then sure as shit, that person ends up doing something that usually ends with me getting my feelings severely hurt. Anyway, when I saw this substitute from a distance, he immediately struck me as odd. He was wearing these tapered leg 90s looking dad jeans, old gym shoes, glasses like Napoleon Dynamite's, and a semi-long dark coat that was probably mid-thigh length or longer. It was weird because it was warm outside, and any gym teacher I'd seen before always wore exercise clothes. However, when I got closer to him, I felt like something was not just weird about him, but also wrong. My gut knotted up, and my heart started pounding out of my chest, and his eyes met mine. I felt like a deer in someone's crosshairs. I wanted to run away, but I couldn't. No one else seemed to look nervous, so I tried to brush it off. It's been easily 10 years since this happened, so I don't remember all the in-between details. But I think after he took attendance, he told us to run a few laps like normal. Once we started jogging, I began to feel better the further I was away from him. Unfortunately, we were running in an oval, so when I was getting closer again, the bad gut feeling returned and got exponentially worse with every nearing step I took. This continued the entire time we were running. I don't really remember what we were doing in class that day. I think everyone was doing different things in their own little groups. Some girls were playing catch with a softball, and most of the boys were playing with the football. And some of us were playing kickball, etc. So we were spread out all over the field. I was just trying to stay as far away from this guy as possible, and I expressed that concern to my best friend. Of course, though, she just had to go to the bathroom and required my company and forced me to go ask the sub with her. I was terrified as we were approaching this guy, and he looked excited that we were coming up to him. My friend didn't seem to feel what I was feeling, so she didn't understand. The sub started talking to my friend a bit, but I wouldn't talk to him. As we were standing by him, several times, he took a small leap towards me, with his creepy smile and his hand in his coat pocket. I would step back every time, because the hell if I'm going to be within an arm's length of someone who's giving me such an awful feeling. He noticed that my friend wasn't shying away from him like I was, so he took a step towards her. So he was standing mostly next to her, but also slightly behind her, if that makes sense, and put his arm around her shoulder. I don't remember any of the dialogue because all I could think about was that his hand was not just on her shoulder anymore. It was also inching down towards her chest. I felt so helpless to what was happening. I felt like all I could do was watch in mute horror as this man tried to fondle my best friend. She and I made eye contact, and my fear was mirrored perfectly on her face. Her eyes were welling up, and she said something about going to the bathroom now. We walked off into the far corner of the basketball court, and the sub didn't notice. She started crying, and between sobs, I was able to gather that she felt something hard when he was standing kind of behind her. I tried to comfort her, but I was completely clueless. We were watching him walk towards another one of our classmates who was playing softball with her friends. I guess they'd accidentally thrown the ball over the back fence. She was asking him if she could go retrieve it. He put his arm around her, but still had the other hand in his pocket. like he did with my friend, but she immediately threw his arm off of her and yelled, "Get off of me." I honestly can't remember the rest of gym class that day. My friend and I were hiding by the trees and bushes in the corner of the basketball court until the bell rang. I do remember that right before class started, one of my peers, with whom I normally didn't speak, approached my best friend and me and asked if the sub did anything to us. She nodded yes, and the girl brought us over to the main group of girls. All of us, all the girls in 5th grade, started talking about what to do. We felt comfortable with the female teacher and felt like we could trust her. So those of us who were in the male teacher's class asked to go over to Mrs. Teacher's room because we needed to tell her something personal. We all told her what happened, and the few of us that hadn't been touched just confirmed what we saw. She said that she'd take care of it for us. When I got home, I found my dad and told him that we had a creepy teacher, and I relayed some of what I saw. I guess I started off the wrong way because he immediately turned pale and yelled at me to tell him if the man touched me. I said no, and he said, "Oh, thank God. I really didn't want to go to jail right now." I didn't really understand how protective a man is of his daughter until I was well into my teens, and my dad described in great detail what he would do to any man or a boy who abused me in any way. Looking back, I know for a fact that if my answer had been yes, my dad would have grabbed that .45 off the top of the fridge, loaded rounds into it, and hunted that sub-teacher down. At that moment, consequences be damned. A while later, maybe weeks or months, my parents approached me and asked if I wanted to testify in court against the sub. They said I didn't need to since they had a lot of other witnesses and victims, but that I could if I wanted to and that it wouldn't hurt. I think he fondled some of the girls in the 4th grade too, but I could be wrong. I said no because I was too afraid of seeing him again, even though he didn't physically touch me. I regret that sometimes, but he got a pretty harsh sentence and is probably going to die in prison. Again, I could be wrong because this was 10 years ago, but I believe that he had previously been charged with some creepy pedophile shit, and the school didn't do a background check on him before letting him be a sub. I don't know if any lawsuits ensued. Maybe I'm making things up. I barely remember, but my parents said I was afraid to leave the house because I thought I would see him and that he would hurt me for telling on him. Something like that. All throughout high school, there was a teacher who I would refer to as Mr. Creep. He deserved this name, and throughout this story I hope you can understand why. It all started in my freshman year. This teacher was an inclusion teacher, meaning he was in charge of taking care of the special needs kids that were allowed to be in the same classes as everyone else. Mr. Creep always seemed alone, and I always felt bad for him, so one day, I complimented him on his haircut. I always regretted doing this because ever since, he was always in the same place as me. Later in my freshman year, I had broken my toe at a haunted house. After I came to school for the first time after I broke it, he stopped me in the hall to tell me I should avoid haunted houses. I just laughed it off, but later, it hit me that it was really odd that he knew how I broke my toe, because I hadn't actually told anyone at school. The next school year, he would always sit with me at my lunch table until my friends showed up. That same year, he was running up the stairs and accidentally tripped, which I just happened to see. He seemed fine until he noticed I was one of the students who saw. He started crying, and later that day he sat with me at lunch, apologizing that he never wanted to embarrass himself like that in front of me. And then in my junior year, he gave me this huge hug on the first day, telling me how much he missed me over the summer. This year, he would always sit with me at lunch, even after my friends would show up. He said that my friends weren't my true friends if they had a problem with us sitting together. One day at lunch, I was talking about how I was leaving early for a dentist appointment. He asked what time I was leaving, and I said right after lunch. Then a few minutes later, he left, which I was honestly so grateful for. Once I got to my car to leave, it wouldn't start. But Mr. Creep just happened to be out there though and offered to give me a ride home. I told him it was fine because my stepdad was on his way to get me, and anyways, he had to get back to school. He just told me it wouldn't take any time for him to take me home since my house was just down the road. That's when I got really freaked out because he knew where I lived. But luckily, my stepdad showed up just in time. Mr. Creep even actually introduced himself to my stepdad, saying it was nice to finally meet the man who raised such a beautiful girl. My senior year, I ended up going to a different school, and I got a new job as a delivery driver. About a week into the job, there was a special note on the bottom of the delivery saying, "Bring to back door, and you can just walk in." which wasn't too odd to me because sometimes that's a common note on delivery for elderly people who can't make it to the door. So I made it to delivery and went inside, but it was no other than Mr. Creep. When I walked in, he went in for a kiss, telling me how much he missed me. I was so terrified, not only because this was my creepy stalking teacher, but he had also just kissed me. He told me how upset he was to not hear from me on our 2-year anniversary, but he said he understood because it's hard to keep in touch after being at a different school. He asked me to quit my job and just stay with him for the rest of the day, so we could celebrate our anniversary the proper way. Luckily, my boss called yelling at me for taking so long on my delivery. So I told Mr. Creep that I had to go quit my job in person so I wouldn't get in trouble for keeping the money from this delivery. Then I would come right back. He was so happy and said that he was excited to see me putting more effort into our relationship. So I quit my job and then I went straight home and told my parents everything. I also haven't heard from Mr. Creep ever since. Hey everyone, I was recently reminded of this story and decided to share my encounter with Mr. Chan, my former violin teacher. I was about maybe 5 years old when my parents decided to follow the typical Chinese stereotype of pushing me to play an instrument. Not just any instrument though, it had to be the piano or violin. I decided on violin mainly because every other girl in my family already had piano lessons, so I wanted to be a bit different. Since my parents didn't have a great grasp on English, they wanted Chinese-speaking instructors, which made for quite a few impractical situations, given how rare they were. My first violin teacher did not perform house visits, so we had to take the train for about 40 minutes to see him every week. He was also pretty harsh and had little patience for a 5-year-old violinist. So my parents and I decided to try and find a new instructor. Enter Mr. Chan, a violinist who I would estimate to be about his mid-30s. His price was cheap and he also made house visits, which we were pretty happy about. Mr. Chan was a soft-spoken man, and as a kid, I thought he was the nicest person in the world. Whenever he came by, he would always give me a piece of candy and would hug me when the lesson was over. There would be a few things that he did that made me feel pretty uncomfortable though. He often looked at me with these smoldering eyes. As a kid, I thought maybe that's just what he looked like, but at times it creeped me out because it felt like he was staring into my soul. Also, when instructing me, instead of telling me something like, "Now put your finger on the E string," he would just tenderly move it for me. If there was any opportunity for him to touch me, he would always do it, moving my fingers and adjusting my arms and head for posture. All of the things I had brushed off mainly because I was a kid who didn't really know any better. After all, he was a great violin teacher, and I legitimately learned a lot from him. One day, Mr. Chan stopped coming to lessons, and we had to get a new teacher. I cried and threw a huge tantrum because I thought he was the nicest guy ever, and I missed the candy. But they refused to explain why he left. Years later, when I was 12, my family decided to break the news to me about what happened. Apparently, Mr. Chen got arrested for molesting one of his violin students, another girl who was about my age. I wonder if he charmed her in the same way.